Dr. Fletcher, and I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Opposition Studies, and you're all very welcome here to the Centre. I'd like to thank Nazneen at the back there and Ruhi, who I'll be handing over to in a moment, and to all of our other guests and baroness for being with us this morning. My job really is, first of all, just to welcome you here this morning, but also to say a little bit about the Centre. And I should mention beforehand that we are being filmed for this morning's event, and if you don't want to appear on YouTube, to let the organisers know, and you can be edited out, I think. But just to say a little bit about the Centre, it was founded 4 years ago, and Dr. Mohammed Abdul-Haq and I had discussed what was a particularly specialist form of study on my part. My interest was mainly on the study of UK opposition, and that's what I'm currently doing my PhD on. But when I spoke to Dr. Mohammed, who's got a lot of experience internationally, and he was very struck by the fact that although we're very used in the UK to the concept of official opposition, having a loyal opposition that is accepted and tolerated by the state, is supported and recognised, it's a concept which isn't universally accepted and has a lot of applications around the world. So a lot of the work we do at the Centre now is based internationally. So we've done projects funded by the Foreign Office with Jordan, we're currently doing one in Kuwait, just to try and stimulate discussion about the concept of political opposition and what it means, and particularly the concept of loyal opposition, and the fact that you can have an opposition which is accepted and which is tolerated, and actually is a good thing in its own right. So it's good to have a critical voice which is there, which is not seeking to overthrow the state, but is seeking to improve things, and also which is there to form an alternative government if the current government falls out of favour. So you can have a peaceful rather than a revolutionary change. So all of these concepts that I've been looking at sort of in my academic career on UK opposition, they're quite applicable around the world, and we found that there has a lot of synergies, not just to Westminster democracies, but also to many countries around the world. So a lot of the work we've done internationally has been based on the Middle East, and so that is I think why today's conference is very timely, and it's something which I think has now become much more of our focus. We do events on the UK. We've got various events coming up in the run-up to the general election next year. We'll be looking at UK politics, but I think actually one of the more interesting things that we do is this promotion of discussion around the world, and it's much wider than just looking at political opposition. It's all about human rights as well, and obviously the role of women in the Middle East is particularly pertinent to that. So that's kind of where we're coming from. We're an independent think tank, we're cross-party, so our honorary presidents are Charles Kennedy, Michael Howard and Neil Kinnock, so we've got 3 former party leaders, and we're not funded by any particular institution. We do projects funded by, as I say, by the Foreign Office, but other than that we're reliant on donations. So we're an independent think tank, and we work with a number of organisations. So we're very pleased indeed to be co-hosting this conference, and that seems a timely point to hand over to Ruhi.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to have all of you here this morning. We are a very small organization, International Coalition Against Violence in Iran. We were founded after the disputed presidential elections in 2009 in Iran and the violence that erupted after that. So a group of us decided to form an organization or an entity that deals exclusively with the phenomenon of violence. We started work on Iran, but then later in the years that came, we decided to expand our work to the Middle East, because what happens in the Middle East affects Iran, and what happens in Iran affects the Middle East. So we think it's a sort of interrelated phenomenon that is happening in the region. Our work is mainly concentrated on annual conferences, which is around the 25th of November, which is International Day against against violence on women. We are about 2 weeks now away from that day, and a day away from tomorrow, which is the International Day of Human Rights. And I think it is a very good opportunity that we talk about the human rights of people, especially women. In 2012, we had a conference almost exactly with the same title on the women in the Middle East, and we had speakers. I was telling Nirvana from Egypt, from Kurdistan, Huzan was from Kurdistan here, and there was a lot of hope at the time of what is happening around the Middle East. Unfortunately, I don't think we have this hope now today in this conference. But anyway, we shouldn't despair. We are here, experts, you and all the speakers, to think how to deal with the problem that we have in the region at the moment. I'd just like to introduce Baroness Tong, who is chairing this first session. I have to read it. And I'm very pleased and honored to have Baroness Tong here, as well as our speakers.
We are neighbours, don't forget that.
Well, I didn't want to mention that. Yes, I have the pleasure of being neighbours with Jenny as well. Okay, Baroness Tong actually is a doctor by profession who worked about 30 years in the national health before, in 1997, she decided to join the parliament from Richmond Park. And I remember at that time, I was living there, I remember that. She was a Liberal Democrat spokeswoman for international development for 7 years, and has been a member of all-party parliamentary group on population development and reproductive health since 1997. She now chairs the group and is the president of European Parliamentary Forum on Population and Development. I think Baroness Tong doesn't need more introduction, actually, as most of us know Baroness Tong. Now I hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lily. It is a great pleasure to be here. For two reasons, really. One is that I'm one of those rare English people who have visited Iran and loves that country. But I've also travelled quite a lot in the Middle East. And I'm passionate about the Middle East. And in despair as to what's happening at the moment. My experience in international development all over the world, not just the Middle East, highlights the position of women, the most awful position, and at the moment it feels like the position of women is getting worse and violence against women is getting more and more common. And this is quite outrageous in the 21st century. It is absolutely outrageous that we as equal human beings to men should be treated in this way. But maybe I'll come back to that at the end. But my most recent experience actually was in Jordan in the summer when I visited the Zaatari camp in Jordan, where Syrian refugees are there. And I think UNHCR has had a huge challenge, and they have to some extent met that challenge. We must be grateful really for what the United Nations organisations do. But it was clear in that camp what the women were up against. Without men, with children to look after, in danger of violence and being raped within the camp, terrified that their daughters were going to suffer the same fate. And for that reason, little girls were being married even earlier to total strangers that they may have met in the camp, simply to keep them safe, as if marrying a 12-year-old girl to a 60-year-old granddad is going to keep that child safe. But I mean, they felt that the child was safer than staying in the camp. with their mother and their siblings. So I have had some experience. I have seen what women are up against, and I feel very fiercely that we all should be doing much more about it. But our first speaker today, we're very, very lucky to have you here, is Her Excellency Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, who's the High Representative to Kurdistan here in London. She's a journalist before she became a diplomat. And she began her career in local newspapers in London and actually won an Observer Award, and I hope you will read the Observer. Yes, we look forward to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm new to the work of the centre here and to the ICAI as well, but what I've heard so far is very important. I'm here to really speak about the situation for women in Kurdistan. I'm sure you all know Kurdistan is divided between 4 countries, Iran, Iraq, Turkey and Syria. I represent the Kurdistan region in Iraq. That's my official position. However, as an ordinary citizen, shall we say, my husband is from Mahabad in Iran, he's Kurdish. I have relatives in Syria and in Turkey, so actually I'm connected by blood to Kurds in all 4 parts of Kurdistan. But my official role is to represent only Kurdistan region in Iraq. Right now in Iraqi Kurdistan, we face a political, humanitarian and military crisis. The political crisis was frankly brought on by Prime Minister Maliki and the support that he enjoyed from Britain, the United States, particularly the United States and Iran. We in Kurdistan region were very publicly, very openly critical of Prime Minister Maliki's policies, arguing that he wasn't a representative or a Prime Minister for all Iraqis. He had very sectarian and divisive policies. He ignored and marginalized the Sunni Arab community and, of course, the Kurdish community as well. And I have to say, many in the Shia community in Iraq also opposed his policies. Despite our warnings and despite the evidence, the support for Maliki continued in a misguided belief that Maliki would keep Iraq together. In fact, our warnings proved to be true, and Maliki headed Iraq in completely the wrong direction, to the point where when the Islamic State or Daesh or ISIS spilled over from Syria into Iraq, they found fertile ground, they found friends and allies among the Sunni Arab community in the Sunni territories of Iraq. Why did they find that? Because the Sunni Arabs felt that the Iraqi government didn't represent them. When there were peaceful protests among the Sunni Arabs, they were barrel bombed by the Iraqi government. So of course, to them, joining ISIS and supporting ISIS, there were many objectives for their joining with ISIS. But if we had had a more representative government in Baghdad, perhaps they wouldn't have been so easily won over by ISIS. So one of the causes of the military or security crisis is the failed policies of the Iraqi government, the previous Iraqi government, and the international support that it enjoyed. But also, ISIS coming into Iraq is a spillover of the Syrian conflict. The international community didn't respond to the Syrian conflict in a timely manner, to the point where various individuals in Gulf Arab states, in other states around the Middle East were supporting ISIS in Syria, to the point where today they have created a monster that they can't control. And we in Iraq and Syria are having to live with them and deal with them. In 2013 and early 2014, ISIS was spilling over into Iraq. By June 2014, they overtook the city of Mosul. This is a huge event in the Middle East and Iraq. Mosul is historically, culturally, commercially an important center in Iraq. Even under the Ottoman Empire, it was an important center. For ISIS to be able to take over Mosul almost overnight in June was an incredible feat. Overnight, we in Kurdistan region in Iraq found ourselves with a 1,000-kilometer border with ISIS. This is a border that we now have to defend. ISIS had captured the most sophisticated weaponry from the Iraqi army that had been supplied by the Americans. It's a big question for all of us. Why did the Iraqi army just disintegrate in Mosul? Why did they not fight? Why did they take off their uniforms and abandon their posts? Why did they leave all their weapons for ISIS? ISIS also has support from private funders and donors around the Middle East, and also it's able to sell oil, as one of our colleagues here was saying earlier. It's able to sell oil as well, and is making a lot of money from kidnap around the Middle East. So we have found ourselves in this security crisis where we are defending a 1,000-kilometer border against ISIS. ISIS has its sights on Baghdad, but also some of the disputed territories in Iraq, such as the city of Kirkuk and other areas. The Kurdish Peshmerga in Iraqi Kurdistan have been able to fight back. We've been taking back territory, winning back villages, towns from ISIS. Crucially, the Mosul Dam is now in safe hands. It was terrible that ISIS were able to control the flow of water, which supplies Mosul and Baghdad, and they could have, if they had wanted to, released the water, drowning potentially millions of people. So the fact that we've safeguarded the Mosul Dam is crucial, and we're also taking back villages and towns. In addition to the security crisis, ISIS have of course caused a humanitarian crisis, a catastrophe. I don't think it's a crisis, it's a catastrophe. And the first victims are women and children. I'm an Iraqi, I'm a Kurd. My people have suffered repeated genocides. We have suffered at the hands of Saddam, as have other Iranian people too. We have suffered chemical bombardment. We have suffered waves and waves of genocide. In 1983, 8,000 men and boys, men and children from the Barzani tribe disappeared under Saddam. The Fayli Kurds, they are Shia Kurds, they suffered genocide as well. I'm sure you've all heard of Halabja in 1988. You've heard of Anfal, the genocide campaign against the Kurds. So we come from a background where violence is part of our history, unfortunately. But even we, Kurds and Arabs in Iraq, are shocked by the level of violence produced by ISIS, inflicted by ISIS on ordinary people. The first and worst victims of ISIS have been women. And it's a deliberate policy. They have published, and I think you can find on Google an English translation, but they've published a sort of a manual, a guide to savagery, and inflicting wounds and rape and crimes against women is part of their manual of savagery. So this is a deliberate policy, it's a campaign, and it is part of a genocide that they're committing. And we should not be afraid of using the word genocide when it's committed. I know that governments are always wary of using it because there are legal obligations on governments when genocide is committed. But we should call a spade a spade. This is what ISIS is inflicting. The worst victims of ISIS have been the Yazidi community. The Yazidis are Kurdish by ethnicity. Their faith is Yazidism, which is an ancient faith, not Christian, not Muslim. In Kurdistan and Iraq, they are accepted, they live in peace, even though the Yazidis, of course, would tell you that they have suffered many, many massacres in their history. And this latest massacre is part of a long series. In 2007, for example, Al-Qaeda exploded truck bombs in one of the villages near Sinjar, killing hundreds of people while they slept. So the Yazidis have been victims of crimes before. But what they have endured this summer is just beyond belief. In early August, ISIS swept through towns and villages in the Sinjar area, including the main town of Sinjar. Abducted women and children, girls as young as 8 and 9 were abducted. Others were just raped, executed. Men were executed, abducted. There are stories now documented of men who were executed en masse into mass graves. There are hundreds, potentially thousands, we just don't know the number, potentially thousands of Yazidi women and girls as young as 8 and 9 who have been sold into sexual slavery. They have become the wives of the emirs of ISIS. They have been sold in auctions, mainly in Iraq, but also in Syria and even other parts of the Middle East. We have testimony of women who have either escaped ISIS or have been rescued. Women who say that they were raped up to 30 times a day. So the crimes that they have witnessed, suffered, are just beyond belief. And this is a systematic policy of ISIS. Their crimes need to be investigated, the perpetrators need to be prosecuted. The ISIS members are not just from Iraq, Syria, or the neighboring countries. They're from all over the world. There are British people, there are Russians, Chechens, French, Americans. Those countries need to think about what monsters they've created. We all need to think about that. We in Iraq and Kurdistan need to think about that. So besides, and of course the Yazidis aren't the only victims of ISIS. The Christians in Iraq, Arabs, Kurds, Muslims, they're all victims of ISIS. But I highlight the Yazidis because their case is the worst and has been labelled genocide by many international lawyers who are specialists in the subject. We in Kurdistan region have a population of about 5 million, similar to Scotland. We're currently hosting about 1.5 million refugees and displaced people. So these are refugees from Syria, displaced people from Iraq. Hundreds of thousands came to us over the past decade, fleeing the violence in Iraq. But in 2014, close to 1 million have come to us fleeing ISIS. Many are Christians, many are Yazidis. There are also Arabs, Shabaks, Kakis. There are many, many religious minorities in Iraq. Assyrians, Syriacs, Chaldeans, Turkmen. They have all come to the Kurdistan region. The sheer number of people is huge. The speed with which they arrived in Kurdistan has just overwhelmed us. We have maybe about 26 camps, but they're not enough and they're not adequate. We're in winter now, and the winter in Kurdistan is extremely harsh. When it rains, the camps turn into lakes of mud. When it snows, of course, we're talking about freezing temperatures, and even now there are freezing temperatures. Not every refugee has a blanket, so there is an appeal to collect blankets. One blanket can keep 3 or 4 children warm at night. There are lots of issues with the camps, with the international aid. We don't have enough health care. We're very, very fearful about the outbreak of disease. Our own health centres and hospitals just can't cope with the number of people who've arrived. The United Nations and aid agencies, DFID, are in Kurdistan. I have to say DFID is impressive, it's very quick, it's very, very speedy and forceful. But I can't say the same about other countries, and I can't say the same about the UN. The UN has become a monstrous bureaucracy that needs to be reformed. Many of my colleagues on the ground are saying the UN carries out survey after survey, assessment after assessment, so that the civil servants working in the UN can tick boxes and say, we did this, fine. But When will you deliver aid? The question is timing. Today we've launched an appeal in the UK to raise money and collect goods for the refugees. But the refugees need a much bigger, forceful, speedy, holistic approach. You know, the women in the camps suffer greatly. Suddenly there are a lot of female-headed households in a very male-dominated society. These people have become paupers and traumatized thanks to ISIS. They have nothing, and the trauma that they're dealing with is beyond belief. And in Kurdistan, we're not really equipped to deal with the psychological problems that the women and the men and the children will live with for decades and will pass on to their children. I've painted a very grim picture, but I'm afraid that's how it is. The one area of hope, perhaps, is the female fighters in Kurdistan, in Kurdish society. In the Kurdistan region in Iraq, our military does have a female unit. And these are women who are on duty for 2 weeks and then they go home for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks they're mums, they take their children to school, they look after the family, and then for 2 weeks they're wearing uniforms and fighting Daesh. The more famous and well-known female fighters are among the YPG, the protection forces in Syria, in Kobane most famously. Of course, the West is obsessed with the beautiful young women who are fighting. But I have to tell you, some of them are scary-looking women who, you know, remind me of my aunts, shall I say. You don't want to mess with my aunts. And again, you know, these are women, maybe now they've been forced to leave, but early on in the fighting in Kobane, these are women who, you know, were wearing scarves and, you know, more traditional Kurdish outfits. And in the morning they were feeding their children and cleaning the house, and then in the afternoon they'd go out and fight. And we're very proud that the women are doing this, and they need to be recognized and helped and supported. I've spoken for my allotted time, so thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Dr. Nirvana Mahmood. And what I do know about her is that she's Egyptian originally. She's an anaesthetist, a medical doctor like me, but an anaesthetist, and that doesn't mean she's going to send us to sleep. But you are very welcome. We look forward to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and I'm very pleased to join you all today here. Apology, my topic is very grim, and I will continue with from what Bayan already mentioned. So she mentioned ISIS and what they do for women, and let me start with what she actually mentioned. Here is a price list I downloaded from Facebook, and you can see they ranked women according to their age. The older is actually bargain for Christmas, £27. And you can actually, what is more horrific about the list is that they are putting in the list children aged 1 to 9, and they are the most expensive part of the list, and they are selling them for the expensive price of 106 sterling pound. And you can see from this list is targeting women by ISIS is not just a dumb or a radical or a dogmatic approach. They are approaching women because they are destroying families, they are destroying community by taking the dignity of the women, by humiliating them, by selling them as slaves. And this is just one account of a woman who escaped from ISIS. And she said from that day on, when they bought her, I didn't want to live anymore. There are obviously more accounts documented by the Human Rights Watch, but this is just one account I want to mention. And why they are targeting women? They actually want to create a community. This is the people who dream about the caliphate. If you marry one woman, you'll have one child in 1 year. If you have 10 slaves, you will have 10 children in 1 year. And they want to expand their community and raise their kids according to their own belief. But moving away from ISIS and going back to my native country, Egypt, actually the medieval ideology of ISIS is not new. Here is a guy called Shukri Mustafa, and he was in Egypt in the 70s. He made a group called Excommunication and Exile. He wanted to withdraw from the society and build his own. He clashed with the authority and actually was arrested and executed. But the mindset of Shukri Mustafa was described in a book I recommend called Orientalism and Conspiracy for the Professor Sadiq Al-Azm. And look, and you just read this. Our backwardness is our authenticity, our primitivism is our identity, and our brutality is our secret tradition. And unfortunately, the government in Egypt didn't handle the ideology. They just executed him and hoped that that's it, that will be the past and it will move. But unfortunately, the ideology continued. And we have to, in the Middle East, reflect, because the journey from Shukri Mustafa to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who is the head of the ISIS, is the journey of what went wrong in the Middle East. And we really need to face up to our problems and address all the underlying problems that led the people to, like ISIS, to rise in our society. And I try to put, it's a very complex phenomena, extremism, and I try to put the reason behind it. And the reasons are manifold. A lot of people talk about autocracy, tyranny, and how it makes you despair and join radicalism. But there are various other reasons who make this radical ideology survive for generation. Mainly, there is ideology which have roots in Islam and unfortunately misinterpretation of the Quran. And there is also, we have to admit that in the Middle East we have a struggle with Western modernity because we search in our authenticity, and unfortunately for 100 years we didn't reach how we define why we are authentic. And we have also to admit that women are part of the problem. Not all women are embracing freedom and equality. There are women who are justifying regression in our societies. So let me move to the ideology. And I listed here some of the problems women are facing, like female genital mutilation or child marriage. And there are explanations to it. They claim they are doing it to protect women from adultery. And those are not the ISIS people who say that. They are well-educated men in our society who defend this kind of belief. Moving on to sexual assault, rape, even acid attacks, which is recently being documented in Iran. And the explanation is there. It's a woman's fault. She is the one who didn't dress properly. She is the one who seduced men. She is the one who looked in a naughty way. And somehow, because she breached the boundaries, she deserved to be attacked. And even slavery, they justify it because they are non-Muslims. We actually invite them to our society, so lucky them, they are our slaves. I wrote this piece in 2012. I wrote it, Where is the Muslim Rage? Because I found by accident this cleric who is an Egyptian cleric, and he used to have a program in one of the private TV channels in Egypt. And here is a dialogue I watched live on television. So a caller rang this cleric, his name is Mustafa Al-Adawi, and they asked him, is it halal or haram to marry a child who didn't reach puberty? And I assumed the answer would be, of course, no. But the cleric calmly and composedly said, yes, it's halal, but the child have to have a purification bath after, even if she didn't ejaculate any fluid. So basically, that scholar and the caller admit that the child will be dry as a bone in this sexual relationship, but she still will not be pure enough and she needs a bath. But what made me outraged from this and really angry is that he cited a verse from the Quran in the Surah of Divorce, and he claimed that this is his background for his fatwa. And unfortunately, unless we are in the main religious institutions in the Muslim world address this manipulation of the Quran and the misinterpretation of its verses, we are doomed to have this practice like child marriage for generation to come. So let me move from the ideology, because I don't want to upset anybody, but I want to move to the most common and easy reason behind extremism, which is the radicals, which is the tyranny and autocracy. And unfortunately, our autocrats in the region didn't handle women's rights in a nice way. Most of them have actually used women's rights as a decoration for their regimes. So we are actually liberal because we're looking after women's rights. And in Egypt, the tradition is that women's rights adopted by the First Lady. So here is Johannes Sadat, who was the wife of the late President Sadat in Egypt, and she made a law in 1979 to try to ease up divorce rights and give some rights to women. The law was resented by a wide section of the Egyptian society because they saw it as jihad law. So once Sadat was assassinated, 2 years after, the law was scrapped because it wasn't popular. But people didn't learn from this. Suzanne Mubarak came, and she wanted her place in history as well. So she decided to have a law called Khula, which allowing women to divorce their men. The law created a lot of controversy in Egypt, and unfortunately it was resented by a wide section of the society. Then we had a revolution and we ousted Mubarak and we thought we'll have our rights. But what happened that after election, the Muslim Brotherhood came. And here is Dr. Azza Al-Gharf. She is one of the Muslim Brotherhood MP, and she campaigned to reverse the Suzanne law. So she didn't want it. But what is even more striking about Dr. Al-Gharf is that she openly defended female genital mutilation. And she said it's up to families to decide whether they will have circumcision for their kids or not up to the society. And we can see that what happened, a lot of women in Egypt start to feel worried about their way of life, about their behavior. To give you an idea, women in Egypt are generally conservative, and the vast majority are wearing the hijab by choice, not by force from the government. But those hijabi women campaigned in the street, but not to support Mohammed Morsi. They campaigned in the street to remove Mohammed Morsi, because they felt they are conservative enough and they don't need more pressure from the government to make them more conservative. And they decided to vote, unfortunately, for the military, because they thought the military might oppress us in politics, but at least it will not force a way of life on us inside homes. Let me move to another country, and here is Turkey. And if you think that tyranny is the only reason behind oppression of women, I want you to think again. Because here is the elected president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who said only 2 weeks ago, bluntly, with no apology, that women are not equal to men. And in case you think it's just an Erdogan and it's not the whole party of AKP party, here is his prime minister, Davut Oglu. And he only 2 days ago said that equality triggers suicide. And I tried to find out what's the scientific basis of this, and I found none. But unfortunately, Turkey is now adopting regression through democratic paths. So it had a forced secularism under Ataturk, and they are trying to reverse that by, we are the majority, so tough, we will have to force our regressive way of life on the rest of Turkey. And that is what is alarming. And the lesson from Turkey is that a ballot box does not reverse ideology. We have to face ideology in various ways, not just democracy. And I want to move to Iran, and I know that you have a session about Iran later, but just to give you an image, this is a woman who's been attacked by acid in Iran, and this is how it looked like. And I'm a doctor, and I know how this will be painful for her for the rest of her life. The other photo is a photo of a woman who all her crime is that she wanted to attend a basketball match. That was too much for the authority. They arrested her and put her in prison, only and released her after a global outrage. So that is the way Iran is different from Egypt and Turkey. We have 3 dystopian models in the Middle East, if you want to choose to call them models. One, Egypt, which is a mess, and we are proud to be a mess in everything, unfortunately. And one is Turkey, which is reversing regressive way from secularism. And one is Iran, is forced Islamism, and this forced Islamism is forcing women to push the boundary and ask for their freedom. None of those models help the women in the Middle East, and none of them is working. And unfortunately for all of us, is that the genesis of the Middle East was really bad and led to all these dystopian models. And because it was bad and didn't progress in a linear progression, groups like ISIS is exploiting the situation and say, so all those modules, they are bad, we are the right, we are the most authentic, we are the most, the right identity for Muslims. And many of you are subscribing for this ideology, unfortunately, because of our mess in the Middle East. Now, let me just briefly mention why women are defending regression. There are a group of women who grew up in this culture within their family. The Muslim Brotherhood are not just men, they are a whole family. And they are defending that and raising their girls from very young age, believing in this ideology. The other group of women, they are just resenting the opposition. So you'll find in Turkey, for example, groups who are defending Erdogan views passionately, not because they really love Erdogan, but because they hate the Kemalist. And this this polarized division, unfortunately, some women are taking the myopic approach and defending the regression because they just hate the others rather than embracing certain values. But also social media is playing a role in recruiting women into radicalism, especially with the ISIS. You have Twitter, you have Facebook, and women are joining that, and they start to get a contact with radical youth who are recruiting them and inviting them to come to Syria and to come for jihad. But here is a story from Egypt about how sometimes regression empower women. The protest in Egypt was the Islamist protest in Egypt was a male-only practice until the coup revolution, whatever you want to call it, in July the 3rd happened last year. And suddenly, the Muslim Brotherhood have rediscovered their sisters. So after July the 3rd, 2013, they invited all the sisters to go into the street and challenge the security apparatus in Egypt. The result was not particularly bright. The security cracked down on those women, arrest them and put them in prison, and this is a group of teenage girls who break into the security forces and unfortunately were arrested. But those girls suddenly found themselves free. Before they were forbidden to go out of home after 9 o'clock in the evening. Now the Muslim Brotherhood tell them you can protest at 3 o'clock in the morning. No worry, just get on with it. And when they are arrested by the police, the Muslim Brotherhood campaign vigorously and portray those girls as the best of the best, the cream of the society. They call them Arabic word harayir. Harayir are the most free. So in another word, the women are torn between the raw anger of the Muslim Brotherhood against the authority and the stupid oppression of the security apparatus in Egypt after July the 3rd last year. I also bring this from Tunisia. Many people talk about Tunisia as the good example of the Arab Spring. It brings democracy and relatively smooth transition. But as you can see, many Tunisian women are not happy and they actually go into Syria to fight and join jihad. And this is bring back the problem of social media and how the social media play with the naivety of certain girls who may be a bit lonely, have problems with their family, and they start to feel more bond with those radical youth rather than their family, and they suddenly disappear. And the problem not just in Tunisia, the problem is just even in various Western countries, while women are just suddenly disappear and join the fight in Syria. Again, back to Bayan, and I would like just a courtesy to all those Kurdish fighters. And as you rightly mentioned, not all of them are young and beauty, but they are clearly good fighters who fight very hard, and I'm very proud of them. And I want to finish on a positive note. Not everything in Egypt is doom and gloom, or in the Middle East. I'm very proud of our new constitution. We can agree or disagree whether it's a coup or revolution, but the constitution is written in black and white. And actually, the Article 11 of the constitution states the word equality. So it's actually, coup Egypt is better than Erdogan democratic Turkey. We believe that women are equal to men. And actually there is a clause in that constitution saying that women should be protected against all form of violence. So I think we believe we have to face our problem in the Middle East. We reach rock bottom now. We have to handle the problem because women in the Middle East deserve better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you both for sticking to time. Absolutely magnificent. I don't know what to say actually. I'm completely. I knew I was going to be horrified, and I've been horrified before, but actually I think the last hour has been truly shocking. And I don't think that any of us can conceive of what life must be like. Or you think of your own small children, my own grandchildren, being in that situation, my 9-year-old granddaughter, being faced with that sort of existence. And in fact, my group in Parliament has done a big report recently on childhood marriage, called A Childhood Lost, but none of it really contained the sort of imagery that is going on now. So thank you very much for telling us how it is. It's very painful to hear it. I'm sure it's very painful to actually tell it, but it needs to be told and it needs to be publicised. Questions, comments, and keep them as brief as you can, but we have till 1:45, I think. We have plenty of time for questions and discussion. Lady at the front.
Thank you very much.
Can you just briefly say who you are? Sorry, just so we know.
I'm Pavlina Rizadeh. I'm coordinator of studies and lecturer at Boston University London program. Thank you very much for the very interesting talk that you both delivered. I was just going to suggest that, especially in relation to what you were talking about, you were looking at various components of this situation. I was thinking, don't you think that the whole process in terms of extremism, to a large extent, is the reflection that the modernism and westernization in the Middle East, all the Middle East, from Turkey, which was the, Ataturk started the whole movement. It came from a self-imposed, a state self-imposed modernization, which was not really indigenous. It was a very Europeanized.
Yes.
And it worked it was very elitist movement, which was supposed to totally change this society. However, as the society progressed and started to industrialize and urbanize, it was accompanied by a very huge rural-urban migration. So the cities were not really the old cities. So what I'm trying to say is that probably all what is happening now is the reflection of a really indigenous identity of a population who primarily coming from the rural area, and their inability to be absorbed, the unwillingness to accept the ideology of modernization. So more than being a defeat of anything, it is something which has probably reflection of people's identity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And can we just save our remarks for later? Because I have been the most appalling chairman in the world. In my shock and horror at what I've heard too, I've forgotten we're going to hear from Rui again, who's going to tell us the legal parameters and the legal situation in Iran. And I'm so sorry. It's really very insulting. It's having heard you to begin with. I sort of... Would you like to come up and tell us?
But that's fine. We could have the questions and then...
No,
No, I'm going to you first, because it will give us time to cool down a bit. I'm sorry.
No, I have to just change it a little bit. To have a break in the middle. Thank you very much, speakers. It was wonderful to hear all the sad picture that we have in the Middle East. I think if I'm supposed, can we have the phones on silent if it is possible? Please, thank you. I think maybe some of my friends don't agree with me, but I really think that maybe the root causes of the present situation in the Middle East came from Iran in 1979, when the revolution happened in Iran, and we all were a party to it. And I've been sorry and apologize for participating on that revolution, because none of us thought that we would be where we are today. Speaking of, because I'm supposed to speak about the legal and the law in Iran, the legal aspects of law in Iran and women. But before I start with that, I just want to add a few sentences on that. I think the ideology of ISIS, when we are talking now, we have had it in the Iranian society, and especially in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The same behavior, the same treatment of people, almost identical to what ISIS is doing, but on individuals, sometimes on groups, like the 1967 massacres in the prisons, and sometimes on the individual. So it's not, I don't think that ISIS is only limited to now, but the way we see it now, it's because it's so aggressive and organized. But we've had the same treatment of many of people in Iran, in the same, through the same ideology. So we've had our share of sufferings of the same sort of ideology. But mostly I would concentrate on the law. In any society that we live, the law is established to protect the citizens, to let the citizen live in harmony, in peace. And in most societies, at least in most advanced societies, developed societies, people resort to law, and people support the law, because most of the time they are the ones who propose to make a bill, to change a bill, or to the parliament through the MPs and so on. Unfortunately, in Iran, especially on the part of women, we have to protect ourselves from the law. And that we have been doing it for the past 36, 7 years. It is the law in Iran and many aspects of it that is endangering the lives of women, creating discrimination, creating extreme violence in the Iranian society. Me and my colleagues could manage in the few days we had this little booklet for you. I'm not going through it, but I just wanted to show you, you are welcome to take it with you. It's a very brief history of Iranian women's struggle since the 1905, if I remember. And I think it's almost the same as the Egyptian women, because it's almost similar struggles. Since over 100 years ago, Iranian women started asking, demanding equality, freedom, the same demands that we can hear now. It hasn't changed. If you flip through this booklet, you would see, we've given you a picture of, from even 1800s onwards, of the women groups, of the women individuals who fought for freedom in Iran and equality and asking for education for girls. They had associations, they had secret associations, they had open associations, and that went on until the middle of the 20th century, where during the Pahlavis, especially Reza Shah, when on the demand of many women at the time, he just gave women more rights and organized the project of unveiling women, which is still very controversial in Iran. Whether Reza Shah was right, whether he was wrong to forcefully unveil women. But unveiling women at the time wasn't only taking off the rubande and all, that was covered, and you see the photos here. Along with it came the entrance of women into the university. In 1936, women entered the university. As soon as Tehran University opened, women entered the university. And then, it went on, and women could enter the university. And then they gained more rights during Reza Shah's son, Mohammad Reza Shah. Again, you see it very briefly in this booklet. Of the gains that women had during the 1960s and 1970s. I think most of those gains were inspired by the women's movement in the West, because I remember in those days I used to travel to London a lot and to the US, and we saw this wave of women's movement, surging. And Iranian women, quite a lot of Iranian women were aware of it. It's normally in the history of the Iranian struggle, it's written that women's rights were given from above, like, the Shah gave women the right to vote and so on. And mainly the Shah's sister, Princess Asha, was the one behind most of the rights that women had at the time. And she has always been condemned for other reasons. But I must say here, from my reading, that she was very forceful in giving women the rights they had. Yes, they were from above, but there were a lot of grassroots women, there were a lot of organizations. We had women's organization, which was a very widely spread through the country of working on women's issues. Slowly through 1960s and 70s, I think we got where that reasonably we could say we had a lot of women in the workforce, in universities, and so on. I was one of them. I was educated at the time, and I worked in the Iranian institutions. I can witness to the achievements we had. Otherwise, a lot might not agree. Now, when we got to the Islamic Revolution, it just started with cancelling all the rights that we had and starting all over. I'm not going through that. I can sit down here and talk to you for the whole day about what happened to us, because we witnessed that. We knew we were the ones that suffered there, and still women are suffering there. We have brought it at the end as appendix in this booklet, and it's just the law. It's not the bills, it's not the directives, which is hundreds of directives that have been issued over the years on suppressing and controlling Iranian women. But the law from the constitution, it doesn't give the women the right to apply for presidency. That's the first thing. From the family law, from the civil code, all of it. There are so many articles and sub-articles to limit women and to just create and increase the inequality. That is one part, which is the law. Then there is the gender discrimination, which comes from the law. If I can portray very briefly, we can start from the bedroom of every family, where the woman is supposed to submit to her husband's wish whenever he wants, whatever he wants to do. That is the law of tamkin, which is in the law itself. Otherwise, she will be deprived of maintenance and so on. If we move to the living room, Again, we have laws there, what you can watch, how you can treat your child, how you can treat your wife. And you come out of the house, then there are numerous laws, how you have to behave in the society, how you are segregated at the universities, how many fields of the universities you are not allowed to study because you are a girl. When you are sitting at university classes, I was reading memoirs of a girl. She said, I was always wondering why the lecturers don't talk to us. And I knew that we were not allowed to talk to our classmates, the men. But I was always wondering why the male lecturers wouldn't talk to us. Then she says, later I understood that they were not allowed to talk to us as well. So it is the law of segregation at the educational establishments. Then there are the contents of what has been written for the children from primary upwards to learn, which is again segregating girls from boys, what the boys have to learn and what the girls have to learn. And that is an absolute catastrophe for the Iranian type of education. Then you come to other bills. I mean, there are so many bills. I've mentioned a few of them here. I'll come to the end and go back a little bit because we haven't got much time to go on. The last bill that was approved gives almost every citizen to go to every woman and tell her you are not wearing proper dress, you are not behaving properly, because it is a law that says, if I'm right, advising the good and preventing the bad behavior. It's Amr B'Ma'ruf Nahy Anil Munkar. This is the last bill that we did. The result was that 2 weeks ago in the small city of Jahrom, about 10 women were attacked by we can support, the ban on the sale of acid, because it's freely, available in Iran. Everybody can buy it, everybody can throw it on everybody's face. So this is the recent consequences of the bill. Then there are other bills which have restricted women. The bill on birth control. We had, as I remember, we had this discussion with Jenny, which said that Iran had a very wonderful program of controlling birth. Now suddenly the government decided that we don't have enough population, which is not true, and we can discuss about that. And what they did, they brought this bill and we put all the articles around it to. They closed down the health clinics which were distributing birth control devices. Then they stopped. They criminalized any type of abortion apart from being really necessary. They prevented men from mastectomy and many other devices, in order. And they started this huge propaganda machine. Bring more children, bring 6, 7, all the clergies on the TV talking about it. And we would know in the coming years the absolute horrible consequences of that. I would end here by just relating one word, that the situation in the Middle East, the catastrophe with the Syria and Iraq, what is happening in Egypt, in Turkey, in Iran, all of them in Afghanistan, maybe with the Taliban or Pakistan, they are all related somehow together, whether they are related by the ideology, whether they are related by the type of culture that goes around or the propaganda. I don't know, we can talk, we need maybe hours to talk about all these phenomenon that is happening in Iran, in the Middle East. But I think they are related, and we have to find that relation, and we have to focus on that relation and find a way to get out of this spiral spread of violence in the region. It's not only the women who are the target, it's the children, it's men, it's everybody. We have to do something about it, and I'm sure that together, if we put our heads together, we can do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and apologies once again, that was really interesting. Now, we have got questions, please. Not statements or speeches, questions. Lady at the back.
I have a question for Bayan. Very interesting what you were saying about ISIS. And as you mentioned, the international community is very good at doing surveys and analysis and whatever, and the solution so far has been a military strike here and there. I'd like to know what you think of the solution to ISIS is, because you've got first-hand experience on the ground. Is the solution a military one, or do we need to approach it from a more holistic point of view? And what is the relationship now between KRG and Baghdad?
We don't want comments from everybody, so I think if we take 3 questions, and then perhaps you answer one of the questions each, perhaps, and then it gets more people in. So can we have another question?
Yes, Nefta mentioned that how extremism on ISIS use social media and Facebook to manipulate young women to join them. And I know that in Iran, for example, we've got so many Facebook things to promote Western feminism. But how can we use social media within Islamic tradition to kind of make women, Islamic women, Muslim women, aware and educate them about their basic human rights, not Western feminism, but what they can expect, what's their right, basically.
And one more question for this one, please.
Question from Bayan mainly is you said that the women and girls are being sold in the market. There is another side to it, is that there are sellers and there are buyers. There is a market for it. Where do you think it's come from? Isn't it coming from the rooted culture and ideology? It's again the same in the Western country, new slavery.
Okay, fine. We've got 3 questions there. Who wants to go first? Would you like to go first?
Sure.
Go first.
What's the solution to ISIS? Well, ISIS is an international terrorist organization and they have very big ambitions. They want their caliphate to stretch from India to Spain, and should they achieve that, they would then broaden it, but that's their initial aim. I was speaking on many television programs in August when they were first sweeping through Iraq and everybody was seeing the horrific pictures on television. At that time, Britain hadn't decided whether to join the airstrikes or not. And I was saying to British people, ISIS is at war with you. You don't realize it, but they are at war with you. So wake up. That's how we should all look at ISIS. To me, ISIS isn't just a threat to Christianity or Yazidism. It's a threat to Islam as well. It's a threat to all religion, to religion full stop. It's a threat to humanity and civilization. So whether you're in favor of women's rights or not, actually you have to just think even more basically than that. They're a threat to all of us in every sense. So the approach to defeating ISIS also has to involve all of us, and it has to be holistic, as you said. We need to counter their ideology and their narrative. I think in Kurdistan, the reason why and I'm very proud to say that the Peshmerga are the front line against ISIS. We have lost many lives in the fight against ISIS. The West dreads putting boots on the ground. We have boots on the ground. We are fighting ISIS. The world needs to accept that others need to fight ISIS too, not just the Peshmerga. We do need a military response. The airstrikes do work, and I wish there were more airstrikes. ISIS were allowed to besiege Kobani in Syria. The Americans didn't do anything about ISIS when all of their trucks, their Humvees, their tanks or in open range. They could have been killed and stopped. They waited until ISIS had practically taken over the city of Kobani. Hundreds of thousands had become refugees. Then the airstrikes began. Airstrikes work, but they should be much more vigorous, and they should be taking place much earlier than they have been. We also need to, as I said, counter the narrative. In Kurdistan, we have a counter narrative to ISIS. Our narrative is, we believe in peaceful coexistence. We have a culture and a tradition of people of different cultures, religions, and ethnicities living in harmony. We're proud of that, and we will defend it. So I think the approach needs to be humanitarian. The humanitarian response needs to be part of it, military and ideological. There was one other question about the market. There is an international market. Yes, you're right. I mean, slavery in the West is increasing as well. We hear all the time about trafficking.
The bill going through Parliament at the moment.
Yes, and I agree, but I should also say that some of the men who are buying the Yazidis and the Christians, it's mostly Yazidis, actually buy them and help them to reach Kurdistan for safety. So not all of the buyers are buying them for the terrible reasons that we know about. There are a few good-hearted individuals who will buy 10 women and girls and then help them find their way home.
Thanks. Social media. It has to be you.
I think it's very difficult to control social media because anybody can just open a Twitter account and say whatever he wants or she wants. And according to how attractive whatever they tweet, they can attract followers. What we can do is, I think is a rule for non-government organization to open a program about how to educate women in a Muslim society about the rights. Then open a Facebook account and a Twitter account and tweet whatever publication and whatever lectures they say. So we don't have, the role of non-government organization is underestimated in the Middle East. We really need a non-profitable organization who are not linked to either Western government or Gulf states or whatever. So they look completely independent and they are talk about the role of women in Islam. I believe there is a liberal case for Islam. Islam is not just a conservative, regressive religion. It's a very progressive religion. So unless we can do that, and it have to be a fund if the radical have funds from the sheikh, we should have funds from the educated people in the region to gather and counter the narrative. We don't have any counter-narrative. We have defensive strategy. So every Islamic organization say, oh, IS is not Islam. Great, but what is Islam then? You have to define it. What exactly the role of women? How to counter the narrative? So I think there is a role of non-government organization in this.
Thank you. Brewery, do you want to comment on any of those?
Well, on the role of social media and feminism in the West. In Iran, the feminism started to develop since 1995, if I remember correctly. That's when I went to Iran and I saw, women activists starting talking about feminism and feminist ideas. And there are mostly Muslim women who grouped and talked about, feminism in the West, and somehow they tried to create an Islamic feminism and then bring the Sharia and women's rights from inside Islam and compare and contrast and get something out of it. But I don't know the beliefs of many of those women, but I know that many of them, since 1997, have moved to the West. Many of them are secular women now. Quite a few number of them are atheists, as they claim themselves. And I think the majority of people, maybe in Iran, have come to this discussion that if we develop the discourse of secularism, separating state from religion, and leave the religion as a whole, Islamic religion, to the private sector, and then move into a more secular society. Maybe that would be a way that we can move forward instead of, because when we are talking about religion, Islam or other religions, I don't want that. I mean, when you talk about Shiaism, there's so many branches, there's so many beliefs, there's so many groups, so many sects. Then you don't know what to choose. Even at the moment, the Iranian government is talking about one branch, one very narrow branch of Islam, Shia Islam. And the right of women and the right of men, the right of children, everything, the right of citizens, within that very, very narrow ideology of Islam. You know, so personally I believe that if we can separate this and if we can spread this idea of that religion is something private and citizens have a right and then define those rights within the framework of law of a secular society, maybe we can move forward instead of going back to the text, to the original text, to the revised text, to the modern text, which are so complicated that the normal, today's citizens are very difficult to understand or debate on it.
I just want to say one quick comment.
Yeah.
One of the problem of Kobani, it's a different topic, but one of the problem of Kobani, when I tweeted about Kobani, Arabs have tweeted back at me and say it's not Kobani, it's called Ain al-Arab, because they didn't like even the Kurdish name of it. We have to acknowledge the Kurdish history, our minority history, if we really want to help the Kurds.
Can I remind you, before we go on, a bit of British history, when Elizabeth I came to the throne after all the troubles of the early Tudor kings, she said, "I do not want a window into men's souls." And she actually firmly believed in secularism. Of course, all the people who were under her didn't believe in that at all and started torturing Catholics like mad as soon as that monarchy was established. But I mean, there is this concept, and I think it's so important, Maria. I so agree with you. I'm fierce about it. Government should have nothing to do with religion. They should permit religion to exist freely, but it should not have anything to do with the actual government and the laws of the country. Now, I've promised that you will ask a very short question because
my question was this. I'm sorry, I made the biggest statement.
And then,
okay. My question was this: don't you think that the intellectuals, including women intellectuals, in the Middle East, underestimated the importance of the state-imposed secularization for the most part of the 20th century and are paying a price for that? That's my question.
sure, thanks. And your question?
Yes, I'm still waiting for that possible potential way forward. Because if you want to wait for the government to come to realization that there needs to be secularized thinking, it's not convenient. Let's face it, for each and every one of these governments in that part of the world, if you have Allah in your side, you legitimize whatever nonsense you want to feed to your people. And it's not something that we could expect the governments to take forward. And the example of Tunisia you mentioned, Tunisia was one of the very front runners in women's rights, in secularized laws, family laws. And then what happened all of a sudden? So is it what Parveen said about the people of the region not being the question? Is it that the people of the region are not ready for moving forward, for modernization?
Okay.
If that's yes, then what's the way forward for it?
Okay, and you, and then you.
Yes, and recently I've heard a paper by a distinguished Iraqi scholar about the Kurdish women, and her assumption was that, the Kurdish women that we see at the forefront of fight against ISIS is the same phenomena that we have seen throughout the Middle East at every revolution or uprising, that they are brought in at the forefront of fight, but then when the fight is over, they send back to their traditional role. Do you agree with that assessment of the Kurdish women? Because that was quite contrary to what I understood from my friends, Kurdish friends, and what I've heard in the video.
Now I'm going to have two more questions from the audience because so many people want to get their oar in. I'm trying to get the audience, everyone here to have their say. So it's this lady here, and then the lady at the back, and then we'll start on the men. Sorry.
Just that by the end, you mentioned that there was a launch of some kind of appeal or something with help. I just wanted to
Sorry, can you repeat that? Didn't hear.
Sorry, I think Bayan mentioned that there was a launch of some kind of appeal or some kind of
A launch of an appeal. You want to find out about that, and then the lady at the back.
Yes, Jamal Khashoggi, who's the managing director of Al Arab news channel, basically said that the Arab lands are fertile ground for this ideology of ISIS. And he did mention, the lack of good governance around. But he also mentioned, and this is my a question directed to Bayan, that if there was a referendum today in Mosul, most people would, vote for ISIS rather than going back to the Maliki government and what there was before. Do you agree?
Okay, and I'm going to allow one mere male to actually round up the contributions from the audience. Yes, and then we'll have the panel again.
My question is to Diane. We hear a lot about Iranian government help to Kurdish people. I just want to know how true it is and how effective it can be.
Thank you. Sorry to tease you. Right, panel, who wants to start on one of those questions? I think there are quite a few addressed to you.
This is the topicality. Kurdish women fighters, will they be sent back to their traditional role? I think there is that risk, that's for sure, and we saw that, I guess, even in the UK, where women sort of found themselves liberated in the First World War and then were expected to go back to the kitchen afterwards. So I think that is a possibility, but
they didn't.
Yes, I was going to say, once the genie's out of the bottle,
absolutely,
you can't put it back. So the genie is out of the bottle for Kurdish women. I think what we've seen with the Kurdish fighters, female fighters, has elevated the confidence of all Kurdish women. So that, and it's elevated the perception of Kurdish women in society. And also I should say that the PKK, whether you think a terrorist organization or not, or freedom fighters, the PKK has a lot of women fighters in its membership already. So they're not particularly fighting ISIS, they have existed for a long time. There have been Kurdish female fighters in history. I remember as a child, which was in the 70s, there was a lady called Margaret, I guess she was a Christian Kurd, who was a Peshmerga, and she was portrayed as a hero, and we all had these beautiful black and white portraits of her in our homes. So there have always been these traditional Kurdish female fighters, but I think this time round, because of social media, because of the reporting on the role of media, everybody knows about it, and it's impossible for the women to really go back to exactly where they were before. The appeal that we launched, actually we launched it last night in the Houses of Parliament. It's called the Kurdistan Emergency Appeal. There is a website, KurdistanEmergency.org, KurdistanEmergency.org. We're basically collecting money, and there is a warehouse. We've partnered with a British charity. We're collecting winter items, blankets, coats, jackets, for people of all ages. A lot of children in the camps, but also elderly women, men. So we're collecting winter items and we're collecting money. We haven't decided yet how the money will be used. We will specify specific items that will be bought so that people know what they're raising money for. And then when we buy them and deliver them, we can take photos and people can feel confident that their money has been spent wisely. I think there was one other question about Iranian help to the Kurds. As President Barzani, the president of the region, said, the Iranian government was actually the first to help us fight ISIS when ISIS swept towards Kurdistan. While the international community, the West, was thinking and dithering, Iran was there. Iran, of course, has different motivation. Iran also borders ISIS. Iran also is a very big and important player in Iraq, particularly, I would say, in Baghdad and the south, less so in the Kurdish areas. But for us, Iran is a fact. It's a huge regional, international player. It's our neighbor. We have to live with Iran. And that's the situation we find ourselves in today. Iran's military is involved in the fight against ISIS, but both Iran and the United States are at pains to say that they don't coordinate with each other.
Oh, about
sorry.
Lack of good governance and also
Yes.
referendum.
Lack of good governance. I think certainly the lack of good governance under Prime Minister Maliki was a huge contributor in opening, in allowing ISIS to find allies in Iraq. Why did ISIS, and even today ISIS can't find allies in the Kurdistan region? Because we have reasonably good governance. I'm not saying the Kurdistan regional government is perfect. We have many issues. We have an opposition that points them out to us. We have a diaspora that points them out to us. But overall, the governance in the Kurdistan region enables the public to participate, to criticize, to demonstrate. In other parts of Iraq, this was not possible. And certainly, as I said earlier, in the Sunni areas, where there were legitimate grievances against lack of public services, what they met was terrible violence. And the Iraqi government under Maliki didn't allow the Sunnis a proper voice. The moment the American troops withdrew from Iraq, Maliki started to hound the Sunni Arab leaders. Vice President Hashemi was one of the first. He was accused of being involved in murders and terrorist events. Maybe he was, but why don't you allow a court or the police to investigate? Why is it a political decision to investigate him? So absolutely good governance is part of it. There's one thing that somebody mentioned earlier. How can we tell women around the Middle East that they have basic human rights? I have a problem that I want to raise, but actually I don't have the solution. Maybe somebody here does. One of the problems I see is that a lot of the international institutions were created by the West after the Second World War. So they were dealing with issues that existed in 1945, 1950, around that time. And of course they were the victors. So they were the writers of these conventions on human rights and women's rights and, I don't know, genocide convention and so on. So they're seen as authored by Christians, by these Western powers. To me, it doesn't matter who wrote it. As a woman, it's my right, and I want to exercise that right. But I think that perhaps for some Muslim women, they see it as authored by a foreigner who is a Christian, and they can't identify with it. That's a problem. I don't know what the solution is.
I've got to come in here because, I mean, there is a problem here in that a lot of people say the West should be intervening more. But the West actually is very bruised from the mistakes that we've made in the past, and the fact that we organised everything in an atrocious way after the Second World War, indeed after the First World War, and a lot of subsequent ills of the world have followed on from that. And sooner or later, things have to come up from the people themselves in a particular region. It can't be solved from people coming in from outside. And I've just, while I've got time, just say one thing about women themselves. For me, as a doctor and a women's health doctor who has been passionate all my life about the woman's right to have control over her own body, to give her health care and above all to give her access to contraception if she wants it, voluntarily, is absolutely key to women's lives. Because unless they have that control over their bodies, whether it's with the permission of other people or not, is irrelevant. They can do it. If they've got access to it, they can do it. And I think that's one of the reasons that we, in this country, are relatively free at the moment, is because we've managed to grasp that control from the men and the church and take it over ourselves. And I think women in the East have got to do the same thing. Sorry. That's my tough
Sorry,
cookie.
Nazanin had a second
Oh, the referendum.
I'll be very quick on the referendum. I don't really know how the people of Mosul would vote right now. But Prime Minister of the Kurdistan region in the past week or so did make a statement where he said, you can't expect the Kurdish Peshmerga to liberate Mosul when the people of Mosul aren't ready to liberate it themselves.
I think that's what I said earlier. We need a local non-government organization coming from us, from the region, not influenced by international organization, listening to the local women, listening to their problem, and formulate advice accordingly. Back to your question about whether we are ready. I think one of the problems in the region during our evolution and modernization is that we are obsessed. The concept of freedom is not clear in our head. I know there is a lot of, in philosophy, what is freedom, but in the region, freedom was always freedom from. We focused on to be free from the colonizing power. We focused to be free from autocracy, from Mubarak. But we never focus what's the day after, what we want after removing Mubarak. We have to believe in certain values. And unless those youth organize themselves, I know the youth in the region are angry because they feel there is no future, but it is partly their problem because they never unite on a common vision after the fall of Arab dictators, whether Gaddafi in Libya, whether in Ben Ali in Tunis. And there is a big division overall in the Middle East, non-Islamist and Islamist Muslim, and we need to emphasize on that. Both of them may look together, may dress together. It's not about dress code. And they are not secular versus Islamist. They actually, some of them very conservative, but they are not willing to accept the value of Islamism, of political Islam. And we see even in the political divide, we have Turkey, Qatar, and the Islamist groups throughout the region, and we have the others basically, and the others are not perfect. They have their own problems as well.
Fine. Now, has everyone had their points addressed? Because we're nearly at the end of the questions. Yes, and you have one more point to raise, and then I think we should break. And we'll all be here, so you have got to say.
Right. Actually, just I want to repeat somehow that lady's comments. I think women and girls in the Middle East feel insecure in their lives. We have to leave intellectual discussions at the moment behind. What they need safe life, quiet life. That the reason why they feel insecure because of ongoing conflict in the region. Since last 10 years, all Middle East countries paid 3 times more to buy weapons from West rather than spending this money to education and probably basic human rights teaching in school. So my question is how we can stop this conflict in the first place?
Stop the weapons manufacturers in the West selling arms to countries who use them for internal repression and external aggression. Do you know that's the law of this country? I know because I helped pass that law when I was in the House of Commons. We should not trade arms to countries who are going to use them for internal repression or external aggression. Now you just tell me who's obeying that, because it ain't the weapons manufacturers.
I think your question for the conflict stemmed from a big original conflict in the region between Saudi Arabia and Iran. These two countries have to sort out their problems, because once they solve our problems, Syria will be solved, and the conflict and the women will be solved, and Iraq will be solved as well. We have to accept the right of minorities and the independence of the Kurdish region, and we have the Iranian, the big divide, the Sunni-Shia divide, have to be solved somehow, because otherwise we'll keep killing each other forever. And I forgot to mention, I agree with your comment.
Thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. I've made far too many remarks in the course of this session, so I won't make any more now. But just to say, you know, my late husband always used to remind me when I agonised about what was going on and said, look, was it 100 years or 200 years that Europe took to sort itself out to any sort of order and democracy, and we're not there yet. I close with that.